Yo, what's up? This is Jay Dennis, and we're back with another ranked and reviewed video. This time, we're going to be talking about one of the most consistent, hardworking, and can't go on a single YouTube channel or video without hearing this word about Sevendust. Underrated bands ever, Sevendust. From 1997 up until their most recent release as of just a couple weeks ago, Blood and Stone this year, we're now at an even 12 albums and roughly 23-ish years, meaning they, on average, put out an album every other year, which is pretty damn great. Before I get into my love of Sevendust and my listening history and the ranking and, of course, the review of their 12 albums, I want to just mention real quick my criteria for these videos. It's kind of evolving over time, but generally I listen to whole albums back to front. They're generally standard edition albums, no bonus tracks, because if they're not all standard edition or bonus tracks albums, it's just inconsistent, so I want to stay level on that. I give every song a rating of 1 to 10. Generally, I do this with bands that I like or love, so I rarely ever listen to bad albums in these ranked and reviewed series, so I'm actually kind of generous with my ratings, and then I just take the score and average them out, and then I rank the albums accordingly. Doesn't mean the best album from any band is the one I listen to the most, and it also doesn't mean it has the best songs or my favorite songs, and conversely, the worst record could have the potential of having just one or two terrible songs that drag an otherwise amazing album down. So I understand that when you are producing or creating a record, I'm looking at it from a holistic view. I don't excuse any songs from it. I look at the album as a whole. So just because an album's at the bottom doesn't mean it's theoretically the worst, or it's got the worst songs, or it's just a bad album. It just means that as a unit, everything involved, there was enough of a blemish on there or something to weigh it down. Whenever you're creating an entire album or producing an album, you have to think of song sequencing, the overall theme, the overall sound, the consistency of tones, mixing, mastering, everything like that. That's just the very minimal that I can say about that. So understand that while I chug some of these videos out pretty quickly, I do take a serious approach to listening to the entire album start to finish. And just because I rank it a certain way doesn't mean it's either the album I listen to the least or the most. It's just my objective look at the album as an entire unit and where I believe it stands. And oftentimes with bands like Sevendust, who are consistent and hardworking and just overall great to say the least, out of 12 albums, you may find that there's going to be quite a few albums that are part of either a 3-way, a 5-way, or even a 7-way tie, with the minor tiebreaker being what was my favorite song off of the album, or was there something else, the mixing, the mastering, the sound, the nostalgia value. It's all subjective, but all that to say, out of their 12 albums, the worst one got an even 8 out of 10, and the best got a 9. So there really wasn't much room for wiggle here. It wasn't easy to do this, but here I am, ranking the 12 Sevendust albums. So real quick before I get into it, my most recent experience with Sevendust, of course, was seeing them just over a year ago. I saw them live. They played a solid, I think it was a 10-song set list, covering most of their discography. Easily one of the best live bands I've ever seen. They sound just like they do on the records. Lejean, or LJ, whatever you call him, he's an excellent vocalist. Musicianship is fantastic. They just seem like a great group of guys. And I've had access to Sevendust since the early 2000s. Once again, we're going back to my uncle's random-ass CDs that ended up being at my dad's house. Sevendust's Home album, their sophomore album, was part of that stack. And while I had a hard time getting into them a while ago, and I didn't quite understand the beauty of that nu metal classic as I do today, eventually I did get back around to, in the middle of the 2010s, around the Kill the Flaw era, something told me to listen to that album. Something told me to listen to Home again. And ever since then, I've kind of listened to them on and off again, but it was really the summer of 2018 when All I See Is War came out, and I listened to it and I was just blown away. And then 2018 effectively became Sevendust summer, where during a transitional period of my life, and especially doing like a tremendous amount of landscaping and yard work around my house, Sevendust and their entire discography was blaring. So Sevendust does have a special place in my heart. I was a little late to the party, but they are certainly one of my favorite bands now, probably in my top 20 to say the least. So I'm excited to rank this, but it's purely for fun. I think they're an awesome band. They don't have any bad albums. They're definitely worth listening to. So with that all being said, let's take a look at the most underrated metal band, I guess, and go through them. So, at the number 12 spot, we have Chapter 7, their 7th album. Sorry, I didn't write down the second part of the album title, but it's Chapter 7. Again, this album got an even 8 out of 10. It actually has one of my favorite Sevendust tracks on there. Where is it? Fear. The song Fear has like a Evanescence sound to it, and like I just love the wah guitar solo with just the heavy ass drop B riffage in the background. And it opens up with an excellent track too that's super heavy. But this album suffers from inconsistencies. There's quite a few dips in it. There's only like, let me see, out of 11 rateable songs, about half of them broke the 8 mark, 8 out of 10. And then the rest of the songs were just kind of good. Nothing mediocre, nothing to write home about. This was just kind of like one of their weaker albums. But the songs Inside and Fear are great. And there are some pretty good guest features on this album. You got Chris Daughtry on one of the songs, The Past. And then Miles Davis of Alter Bridge. I forgot which song he was on. He did a pretty great job on his feature. And then Prodigal Son is a pretty catchy track too, but it's just an inconsistent album. It's okay for a band to go back and forth between more melodic and then heavier, but as much as this album did kind of have its own identity, it just seemed kind of like one of the weaker Sevendust albums. But it's worth giving a solid listen to. There's definitely some gems in there, but Chapter 7 is my least favorite album. But in terms of having the bookend effect, meaning it opens and closes on a strong note, Inside is one of the stronger, I guess, Sevendust opening tracks. And then the instrumental at the end of Walk Away, the instrumental section, I really enjoyed that. So that's the number 12 spot. It goes to Chapter 7, Hope and Sorrow. Really no nostalgia value there, but it does have one of my favorite songs, Fear, with an excellent guitar solo. Number 11 spot, we have, from a similar era, 2010's Cold Day Memory. My buddy of mine is not going to agree with me for this, but to me, this album opens up with their weakest opening track, Splinter. It's got great riffs, and it's a pretty great song for the most part, but I do not like that bridge. I do not like that. I don't know if he was using like a phaser or like a whammy pedal, if that's like guitar or synthesizer. I don't know what the hell that is, but to me, that kind of ruins the song. Other people might love it. I don't. The thing about Cold Day Memory, though, is it does have a few more redeeming songs that just make it slightly better than Chapter 7. Forever is a great track. Karma is one of my favorite songs on there. And Unraveling. Unraveling is a great single. But yeah, ultimately, this is just a slightly better version, I guess, of Chapter 7. A little bit of a different theme here. There's definitely some more epic, kind of like powerful choruses in, like, again, Unraveling or Nowhere. There's more alternative guitar sounds and solos, which I like, and the choruses also, meaning like alternative metal. So I like that they incorporated that into this one. But this is just, again, I don't know if it was just the era or if it was a band member thing or whatever. But Cold Day Memory is just a slightly better album than Chapter 7. Definitely not one of their better albums, but still worth listening to, and there's still a handful of good tracks on here. Next up at the number 10 spot. I'm a little bummed this one ended up here, but I'm also happy that it didn't end up at the very bottom. We have their debut album, their self-titled album, Sevendust, from 1997. Don't have a whole lot to say about this album, except for it really does capture the sound of the 90s with the wah pedal, the funk, the kind of like the reggae sound almost with some of the instrumentals. But what I really like the most about this album is I think it's the only album where Lejean, or LJ, the vocalist, is doing all the vocals, I believe. I think he does all the clean vocals and all the heavy vocals. He may have delegated all that to the drummer Morgan, and I forget if it's Clint or the other guitarist that does backup vocals too, but it sounds like Lejean is the one doing everything on this album, and he sounds great. This album opens up with 3 solid tracks, and of course a classic Sevendust song, Black. It's got amazing social commentary to it. Bitch is a great song, sounds like a great alternative 90s metal song, and then Terminator is actually a fun song too. But aside from that, Too Close to Hate, Face, and My Ruin, those are all good songs, but then the rest of the album is just kind of, it's good, but it's not top tier Sevendust. So I like the time capsule effect of it sounding like just like the late 90s, metal 90s. But it's definitely on the more raw sound, and it was kind of showing what Sevendust would ultimately end up becoming. So at the number 10 spot, I have their self-titled album, which is definitely worth listening to from start to finish, but definitely the album I probably listened to the least, but at least the first handful of tracks are solid and worth listening to. A lot of replay value there. All right, and at the number 9 spots, we have an album, which, by the way, I usually do check to see if there's other ranked and reviewed or discography listings from other blogs or YouTube channels. I just like to see what other people think too. The reason I'm bringing this up is because the next album is the one that I see most people put at the very bottom, but I happen to like it a little bit more, is their 2005 release, Next. Again, another album that opens up with one of their weaker opening tracks, but beyond that, tracks 2 through 7 are all, rather 2 through 6 are all awesome Sevendust tracks. Ugly, Pieces, Silence, This Life, Failure. I enjoy all those songs, but out of the 11 rateable tracks, for the most part, this album is very much front-loaded. The back end is weaker, and that's why it dragged the score down. Now, again, a lot of these albums are pretty close in rating, so it's not like I'm saying Next is significantly worse than the worst one, but it's the little things that make it place where it is. It does have one of my all-time favorite Sevendust songs, Ugly, which they played live, and it sounded amazing. But I think Pieces is another solid single. I think that one's got a music video. I really like Silence, and again, This Life and Failure. 2005 was part of the alternative boom that was going on, and even though Sevendust is a metal band, they definitely had that time capsule effect of this is what 2005 sounded like. You had the alternative metal of the 2000 sound with the guitar work, the solos, and the effects that were like part of the transitions of songs. Like, it sounded very much like a 2000s alternative metal album. And overall, aside from the back end of it being not as solid, I would actually say that Next is a pretty well-rounded album. So this one has a tiny bit more sentimental value for me. Like, I did listen to my favorite tracks off of this one quite a bit, and I do have a Sevendust playlist that has like my top 40 songs out of their entire discography, although I do need to add the new Blood and Stone tracks to it. Yeah, I would put Next at the number 9 spot pretty comfortably. Next up, though, we have what's basically a 7-way tie between the number 8 album and the number 2 album. and everything in between. This is essentially a 7-way tie, but I think I've figured out how to rank these comfortably. These are all definitely kind of malleable. They could all be kind of interchangeable, but I don't think I would put the number 8 album at the number 2 spot, or the number 7 album at the number 2 spot. But all these next 7 spots are all very close in rating, but I figured out how to rank them appropriately based on a couple of X factors. So with that being said, at the number 8 spot, we have their 2007 release, Alpha, which opens up with an excellent song, Death Star. And I just love the amount of vocal experimentation that LJ does, Lejean. If you're punching the computer screen saying, why can't I get the name right, just bear with me, all right? In the song Story of Your Life and Confessions of Hatred, LJ just sounds really, really different. But I love the aggression that he does. He has like an aggressive clean tone. I think it's in the chorus of Story of Your Life, and then the whisper vocals that he kind of does, or the soft-spoken vocals that he does in Confessions of Hatred, it just sounds really like new metal-ish. You know, Sevendust, they were definitely one of the bigger bands, I guess, of the new metal era. I don't think they ever fully ditched the sound, but they've had a lot of other sounds within them. So for them to occasionally revisit that sound is pretty fun. But Death Star, Feed, Suffer, Aggression, that piano intro, and then of course the title track Alpha, all great tracks. At this point, we're at about an 8.25 out of 10 in terms of how I rate these songs, but Alpha is a solid album, much like Next. It's just more consistent, but beg to differ in Story of Your Life, even though Story of Your Life has great clean vocals or aggressive vocals from Lejean. It's just not my favorite song at all. So it's got a couple little dips here and there, but Alpha is still a solid album. It's very heavy, but the melodic parts are definitely worth listening to, and there are a handful of really great tracks on this album. So at the number 8 spot, we have Alpha. Next up at number 7, we have their 2013 release, Blackout the Sun. This was the longest they'd gone between albums. 3-year difference between Blackout the Sun and Cold Day Memory, it looks like. Blackout the Sun, much like Alpha, is just... Actually, no. The way that the strengths of this album, aside from actually being one of the unique albums that has an intro, it's a solid instrumental intro, that leads into Faithless. Let me see here. Compared to Cold Day Memory, which came out prior, this album is heavier. It's more polished. And there is no song that dipped below an 8 out of 10. So the consistency of this album is just excellent. However, what really elevates it higher up on the list is the better tracks. We had a couple of high 8 rated songs, such as Dead Roses, the single Decay. It's an excellent Sevendust song. And then Murder Bar, the closing track. I fucking love that song. It's the best song on the album, in my opinion. So while I don't have a whole lot of nostalgia or specific things to say, I would just say objectively Blackout the Sun is definitely one of their most consistent albums, and with a handful of really, really great tracks, it elevates it more towards the very middle of the list. Next up, we have the album that basically rebirthed my interest in them, All I See Is War from 2018. The only thing, in my opinion, that this album really suffers from is... So they got on Rise Records, oddly enough. I don't know why. I don't know how Rise acquired this band. I don't know enough about the Rise record label anymore to either grant criticism or favor towards them. I didn't think Sevendust would be a band they went towards. But I've noticed that with Rise Records, they either have really great sounding albums or they have these really empty mixing sounding albums. And while All I See Is War is a good sounding album compared to other Sevendust albums, it doesn't have as much low end sound. Sounds like it's lacking. It's a little empty sounding at times. But the reason why this album definitely goes more towards the top, well, the number 6 spot, is the music writing and the hooks are fantastic. This is like stuff I've never heard from Sevendust before, but they didn't abandon their sound. They just did some new things, and it sounds really good. There's more hooks. The solo and the opening track, Dirty, is awesome. God Bites His Tongue. I love that intro guitar melody that's being played. And of course, there's some heavy ass shit like Risen, that opening, that I know this isn't the first album that they went this low, but just the fact that they're playing so many songs in drop G sharp, I love that Sevendust started tuning lower and playing in lower tunings. Like, they sound fucking great. Medicated is an excellent single. So is Unforgiven. I don't know if Risen's a single, but again, that's awesome. But the song that stands out the most for me is Life Deceives You. It's just a beautiful, heavy, but also just like this melodic, beautiful track where his vocals, this is easily one of his best vocal performances that I've ever heard. So All I See Is War comfortably sits at the number 6 spot, and it's the album that rebirthed my interest and my eventual love for Sevendust, and the songs sound great live too. So personal favorite song is Life Deceives You, but there's quite a few other tracks on here. No song dips below an 8 out of 10. So very solid album with a couple of really great tracks. All right. Next up is we have the other album that I listened to when it came out, just not as much, but Kill the Flaw from 2015. Just like some of these other albums, it opens up with, in this case, a Grammy. I forgot if it was Grammy winning or Grammy nominated song, Thank You. This song just opens on such a heavy but like beautifully melodic and mature note. The one thing that Kill the Flaw has over All I See Is War is the fucking sound. It sounds like it was mixed better. It sounds like more thought went into the production behind the album. So while it has less tracks that are my favorite, there are songs on here like Chop and Silly Beast that are just excellent and heavy and like nothing I've ever heard from Sevendust before. There's shredding, there's low end, there's drop G tuning, even lower. And songs like Death Dance and Not Today, like really heavy, low end Sevendust material that just really complements Lejean's vocals and is very well written by an awesome group of musicians. And this album, much like all the other ones, very much does have its own identity, but I would say Kill the Flaw is just in a world of its own with regards to having its own identity. There are songs on here unlike anything I've ever heard from Sevendust, and they're very well written, very well executed. Thank You is a very unique but easy to follow song. Same thing with Forget. I don't know exactly how to put it into words, but like Forget is a very unique song that has a lot going for it. I don't know how amazing some of these insights sound, but I'm going through a lot of music and a lot of albums here. But again, Cease and Desist, Not Today, all great tracks. Again, my favorite songs are Chop and Silly Beast. They're just super heavy, well-written songs. Album kind of slows down towards the end with the last couple tracks, but they're not anywhere near weak enough to put this album below the number 5 spot. So now we're going to move our way up to the top 4, which I'm going to try to knock out in this last clip. All right, now for the top 4. I'm going to try to keep these 12 albums under 36 minutes here. All right, you might be wondering, oh wow, Jay, you must be putting this new album up pretty high. Well, you're right. With regards to these last couple of albums, this last decade, Sevendust has obviously put out great albums in the last decade. This late in their career, they are nowhere near done, and they are still doing excellent. So with the number 4 spot, part of what inspired me to make this video is their newest album, Blood and Stone, at the number 4 spot. Again, mostly a 7-way tie between most of these albums, between the 2 and 8 spot, but Blood and Stone, what puts this one definitely towards the top is there are just really highly rated tracks on this album. Again, no tracks on this album fell below an 8 out of 10, but Dying to Live is an awesome opening track. It's got a 90s sound to it. It's got a modern day sound to it. It's got so many things that I love about metal music and about vintage 90s new metal music. It just they captured that sound. Ba-na-na-na, wow, ba-na-na-na, wow, just like that phaser, or I don't know if they were using a phaser or if they were using like a wah pedal mixed with a whammy pedal or something, but just an awesome riff that's just, it's bouncy, you can dance to it, but you can also headbang to it. Like I love it. It's very well written, and the album itself sounds better than All I See Is War. So whatever emptiness they were missing or having in All I See Is War, they remedied it with Blood and Stone. So Dying to Live is an excellent way to open the album. The following track, Love, very much reminds me of the second track of All I See Is War, God Bites His Tongue. Kind of similar, but this one's just got a little bit of an edge to it, and it's got, again, the vintage sound mixed with modern sounds on the guitar work and the vocal phrasing. It just I really enjoyed it. Kind of slows down a little bit with Blood from a Stone, but it's still a great track. Once again, though, my favorite track, and it's because it's got the heavy, happy sound, and Lejeune really pushing his vocals to the limit. Feel Like Going On very much reminds me of Life Deceives You, only even marginally better because of the amazing guitar and piano work going on in the background with like the solo. It's just a very beautiful song. It gives me goosebumps when I hear it, and it, like, even just thinking about it, I can feel what I'm feeling right now. But yeah, from there on out, though, the album is just solid. It was a bit of a grower. A couple of tracks definitely got better the second and third listen through. So Blood and Stone is an excellent addition to this otherwise abysmal 2020 year. Although 2020 has had a lot of great things to offer, Blood and Stone is definitely one of them. Sevendust is definitely still at the top of their game, and that makes me very happy that they're still putting out top tier material this time around. But and like I said, it's not just Feel Like Going On, but all the other tracks for the most part. Against the World, Desperation, Criminal, Kill Me, all very much have the beautiful compositions with the strings, melodies, and harmonies. They like, it all just sounds very cohesive, and the mixing is just a lot better. So that's why Blood and Stone is that much higher up. But now we're going to the top three during the era. Obviously, you know which three albums are left at this point, between the years of 1999 and 2003. So the turn of the century era, where I believe Sevendust was at their peak. At the number 3 spot, I put their 2003 release, Seasons. And it's just because, again, the flow of it is consistent from start to finish, but it's the top rated songs that just have that classic turn of the century sound. You got the opening track, Disease. Of course, you got the single Enemy. Seasons has a little bit of an alternative swing to it, but it does have that still like metal intensity behind it. And I love the guitar work and the bridge. Like, it's very well written. But songs like Disgrace and, of course, Broken Down, those songs just like hit me super hard in the nostalgia feel. So even if I didn't personally listen to the album back then, it has the ability to take me back as if I did. So those particular songs really gel for me, and those songs are powerful enough with the nostalgic X factor for me to put it this high up on the list. So obviously not a whole lot to say about the album other than it's fantastic and an excellent follow-up to Animosity. But at the number 2 spot, which ends the 7-way tie, but I think I could put this one comfortably at the number 2 spot, is their 1999 release, Home. Very interesting way of opening the album with that. I forgot if it was drop A sharp or even lower, but just Home is just like this heavy ass tribal sounding. I don't even know how to describe it. It just seems like a perfect live track. And then it goes perfectly into one of their most iconic songs, Denial. Home is not the album that I listen to the most at all, but as a unit, it does have a pretty seamless flow and listening experience. You can listen to the album pretty easily from start to finish without skipping any tracks. It's just, you don't hear any other songs like you hear like on Home. Denial is very much a unique song, and so is Waffle, so is Grasp, Crumpled, and Bender. Yeah, fucking Chino from Deftones and Bender. Like, this is a 1999 time capsule where, even though this isn't a new metal album that I listen to the most, I respect the shit out of it, and they played quite a few tracks off of this album. I think they played, of course, they played Denial. I think they played Reconnect, which was a bit of a treat, a little bit of a deep cut there, possibly. I don't know if they play that one live very much. One of my least favorite tracks, though, Feel So, and then Licking Cream. I don't dislike the songs. It definitely, again, it's got that vintage 99 sound. But, again, the reason why this album places at the number 2 spot is because of the nostalgia factor and because of how early this was a sophomore success. So even though this is not an album I listen to the most, I can't not give it the kudos and the praise that it deserves in its place in metal history. So objectively, this album is the number 2 album. But for me personally, maybe I'd rank it a little bit lower. But again, in the scheme of the 7-way tie, you cannot take away the 1999 factor and the fact that this album was a part of a historic time in metal history. And Waffle just fucking bangs, man. So does Crumpled and Bender, and Denial is just one of Sevendust's best tracks, hands down. All right, and that takes us to the number 1 album. I didn't mention this early on in the video, but a couple years ago, it wasn't just All I See Is War. It was the fact that I was in this new metal forum on Facebook, and I saw somebody post the album cover for Animosity. I'd never listened to the album before, but the album cover captivated me, and I was like, maybe I should listen to this album because they're saying on the new metal forum how underrated it is. And my God, were they right? I don't know about being underrated, but Animosity is by a long shot. This 7-way tie was like an average of like an 8.35 out of 10. I gave Animosity a solid 9 out of 10, meaning the album itself is excellent. I rarely ever give albums a 9 or higher. It's super hard. I'm very generous with the good and the great, like the 7 and the 8 out of 10, but like getting a 9 or higher for me is very difficult. Animosity checks off all the boxes. It is the absolute perfect album to come out in 2001, and it just opens and closes, and everything in between is just top tier Sevendust lightning in a bottle. Tits on a Boar, or Toab, whatever you call it, is probably the best opening track to a Sevendust album, along with Dying to Live. I think Dying to Live from Blood and Stone is so fucking good. But Tits on a Boar, just with the guitar string scratching, the harmonic scrapes and scratching, it's just very well written. But also, it sounds like he's like rapping. It sounds like he's rapping and he's scatting. And the choruses and in the verses, like, the new metal spirit is still very much alive in this album, even though they've kind of progressed and started to do other things that are more traditional Sevendust sounds. But much like Denial, the quintessential amazing single and second track off of Home, you have Sevendust's technically their best song, Praise. When I heard this song and I was getting into Sevendust, this was the song that did it for me. It was Praise. And they played it live, and it was untouchable. But Praise is just an iconic song, and the music video is awesome, and it really encapsulates the turn of the century culture. Like, I love it. And then it's followed up with Trust. Like, the first 3 tracks of Animosity all break the 9 out of 10. Trust has just got that beautiful dissonant riff and drop A sharp. And then even the following tracks, Crucified, Christmas Day, Dead Set, Shine. One of my favorite tracks on the album, Follow. It's just a song that really grips me during the summer months. And then, yeah, this album just never slows down. Not every song on here is a 9 out of 10 or higher, but the weakest track on this album got an 8.6, which is damaged. But everything else is an 8.7, 8.9, 8.8, and then higher than that. So it ranges from an 8.6 to a 9.5 with the song Praise. Praise is a nearly flawless track to me. And overall, this album got a 9 out of 10. I love Animosity. It's lightning in a bottle. And Sevendust has managed to take elements of that album and put it towards future releases, but they have not put out an album of that caliber since 2001. But you know what? That's fine. It's an amazing legacy. Sevendust should be proud. I don't want to just hop on the bandwagon of saying one of the most underrated bands of all time. I don't know, man. It's just part of my personality to go against the grain and shit on popular sentiment. But I firmly do believe that perhaps this band is underrated, but they have a solid fan base. They're very much loved. They don't have any controversy that I know of. And as far as I know, they look like a solid group of guys. I'd love to meet them someday. But thank you, Sevendust, not just for putting out an amazing year or an amazing album in an otherwise questionable year, putting out one of your best albums, but also just the legacy you've left behind since the 90s in new metal, alternative metal. I had a really great time ranking and reviewing these albums. I've enjoyed every Sevendust album. I don't listen to them all the same, but I do have a pretty solid playlist of my best tracks off of every album. So to recap, from 12 to 1, we have Chapter 7, Cold Day Memory, Self-Titled, Next, Alpha, Blackout the Sun, All I See Is War, Kill the Flaw, Blood and Stone, Seasons, Home, and the number 1 spot goes to Animosity. So thank you guys for listening. I love Sevendust. Maybe you do too. Let me know what your favorite songs or albums are, what you agree with or what you disagree with these rankings. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and check out the Ranked and Reviewed series where I do a bunch of other metal bands, and of course I do some other non-metal bands. I've ranked and reviewed Eminem and Taylor Swift also, so be sure to check out my channel, check out my other videos, and thank you guys for watching.